For more on this, Virginia Congressman Denver Riggleman joins me now, and for the purposes of this conversation, interestingly, he's also a former staff member of the January 6th committee. Denver, what do you expect tonight?
Major, I think they're going to interleave a lot of intelligence elements. You know, I was a counterterrorism specialist. I worked in data. So what I think you're going to see is you're going to see a lot of video. I think you're going to see testimonies, but I also think they're going to utilize data, whether it's text messages, maybe call records, to try to really capture the 187 minutes on that day in January 6th. And I believe with that testimony from the Matt Pottingers and things of that nature, I think they're going to try to present that complete story of what happened that day.
So you're a former member of Congress. I want you to address something that is, to the degree there is Republican pushback about the Select Committee, it's that, well, it's not constituted properly, and because it's not constituted properly, there isn't a chance for other questions to be asked or witnesses to be pressed on information. Address that if you could, because you were in there, the origins of this committee, and what you think it's nevertheless unearthed and presented to the public writ large.
That's a great question. It's a little bit to unpack. First of all, when you look at the constitution of the committee, the staff members are so nonpartisan. A lot of them are AUSAs, they've been investigators, not really part of the political process at all. When you talk about the opportunity Republicans had to add members to this committee or to actually be part of the committee, they sort of let that slide away. So it's very hard for me to have any type of tolerance for that kind of ridiculousness when it comes to arguments. Also, when you look at the evidence that we've seen, has been all Republicans. So it's very difficult, I think, for them right now to push back when you see that the people that are testifying, you know, those that are coming out, whether it's attorneys, whether it's individuals that were in the administration, whether it's staff members, all these individuals are Republicans or GOP. So I just think it's very difficult to present an argument that's cogent about the constitution of the committee or how it's constituted or what those individuals represent. Again, you know, if you look at me, former Republican congressman for Virginia, but my background was data analysis and counterterrorism. We just look at the facts, and facts are a very difficult thing to get away from. I know you hear all the sayings, right? But facts are really a 1-2 punch. They're an uppercut, and when they land heavy. And I think tonight you're going to see, you know, some uppercuts as far as facts based on the 187-minute gap that you saw on January 6th.
You know, in the immediate aftermath of January 6, 2021, Denver, there was a sense that maybe the president was frozen. He didn't know what to do. As I listen to committee members describe what they intend to present tonight, that's not the image that's going to linger. It's going to be an image of the president not frozen, but actually enthused by what he saw. And his inactivity wasn't so much because he didn't know what to do, is that he didn't have any intention for a while, a good long while, of stopping what he was seeing play out on the steps of the U.S. Capitol and inside that sacred building.
You know, Major, a lot of people talk about the 187 minutes from 1:10 p.m. to 4:17 p.m. I'm more interested in the 7-hour and 37-minute gap in the call logs or call records. And as an intelligence officer, somebody looks at data, I don't even care the reason. I don't care if it's deliberate or not deliberate. What happened in that time? I think that's what they're going to show today. And when you look at the president, we know this is the 8th hearing. We know that he just wasn't sitting there sort of incapacitated or didn't know what to do. He was activated. And I think when he's watching television, when he sees people that are excited, when you look at his 4:17 video, his 4:17 p.m. video, which was really ludicrous, saying that he loved them all. I mean, these type of things that you see, that's evidence, right? That's sort of a fact-based way of looking at this, is that President Trump was more than likely enthused about what was happening that day. And regardless, you can't go back in the past and change data. You can't change facts. And again, tonight, you know, in prime time, you're going to see that the president was more than likely supportive of those individuals that were there. And he is still spouting the same crap, Major. He's still talking about stop the steal and that the election was stolen. He's still saying the same things. So again, it's really difficult to think that he was so incapacitated or so stupid, or that he was inactive. All these things, I think, are, you know, just sort of ridiculous. I think you had a president or a former president that was pretty excited about what was happening on January 6th.
Denver, as you well know, in about a third of the Republican Party, there is a belief that what happened on January 6, 2021 was in some ways patriotic. The former president describes it as such. You've talked about your previous pre-political life and the work you did there. For Republicans who might be listening to you, who are on the fence about this or who still believe it was more patriotic than not to storm the Capitol, what would you tell them?
It's not patriotic to storm the Capitol based on a fantasy. based on a lie. It's never patriotic to storm the Capitol. It's not even a conservative principle. And I think what you see right now is that so many people were caught up in fantasies, whether they were QAnon conspiracy theories, sort of that conspiracy sticky bomb, right, that everything stuck to, stop the steal, all the ridiculousness, even some individuals believing that, there were children in the tunnels of the Capitol. All that was a fantasy. I don't know if we've ever in the history of our country had something like this happen, where a conspiratorial fantasy, an apocalyptic sort of messianic message of good against evil really pushed people to storm the Capitol. And it was a coordinated effort. And I think that's what I would tell Republicans right now is look at the facts. Don't go to the far right fever swamps and, sort of the alt-right type of individuals that are spouting nonsense or grifting off of you individuals out there who are giving money to these type of causes. This was a money-making venture. This was a power grab. We can call this an internal coup. This was based on specific types of documents. It was based on a plan. It had individuals that were really trying to execute a mission. You had a legal theory behind it. You had lawsuits and cases, and all of it was based on a lie and fantasy. And that's what I would tell the Republicans out there is that for this time here, please pick facts over fantasy, because that's the only way we can move forward as a country in really a thoughtful way.
Denver, what can you tell us about this interim report that the committee has said it's going to release sometime in September?
Well, there's so much data. I think they want to, right? I think the reports, I know that it's exciting to see the hearings. I do believe the reports might be more important. I think the interim report is going to capture what they have in evidence up to this point. The fact is they're having more and more evidence come in every day as more and more individuals come forward, and as they see more metadata or they see more text messages or emails. You saw that Eastman has to give his call detail records up. There's other individuals who might have to give up their CDRs so we can see their phone records. So as that comes in, that's very important. But I think they have to have an interim report that comes out that really encapsulate what's happened up to this point. And I think by December, I think that's when you're going to see the fully bound version of the report that's been finalized, edited, and all the last-minute facts sort of put in there.
Former Virginia Congressman and former member of the January 6th Select Committee, Denver Riggleman, thanks so much for your time.
Thanks, Major.